Yeah, unfortunately, the trend has really just continued. We see extremely high levels of adolescents using cannabis. It really is most of the kids that I see. And when there is an exception of someone who's not using cannabis, it sticks out to me, and I make a note to myself to praise that person for the great decisions that they're making. One of the other challenges that has come up is the acceptability of cannabis use within families. I think many years ago, kids would try to hide their cannabis use from their parents. But now with legalization, I think that there are a lot of families, parents who also feel like, well, it's legal, so it must be safe and it must be okay. And they're well aware of their children's cannabis use, and either feel powerless to stop it, but also some go beyond that and are accepting of it. And I've even come across more than a handful of families where youth are using cannabis with their parents. So it really has become, in some ways and in some circles, sort of socially acceptable. And then the challenge, of course, is that kids will develop psychiatric disorders in the context of this use, right? These are vulnerable kids with vulnerable brains, and they're experiencing psychosis, depression, anxiety, trouble with cognition and motivation, and also getting into trouble at school and having, role failure, not able to do their schoolwork, getting suspended or kicked out of school. So there's a lot that goes along with the cannabis use, and we're just continuing to see it in droves. Psychoeducation, both with the patient, but also with parents and guardians. Because there is, I think, a lack of knowledge out in the public that cannabis can be harmful, particularly for the developing brain. And so we do make it a point to talk with each kid who is using cannabis to let them know, it may seem like your friends can use cannabis without any problem. It may seem like grown-ups in your world can use cannabis without any problem. But really, for the developing brain, it can be harmful. And especially if you have any vulnerability to psychiatric illness, and it is something that you want to avoid. And we can, talk with kids about ways to avoid it. What could you tell your friends if they're offering you cannabis? How do you say no? We can even do a little bit of role playing. So we try to focus on that educational piece, which I think is missing sort of out in the general community with kids. And then we do the same with parents and guardians, to let them know that, yes, cannabis is legal for adults. It's not legal for kids, and the developing brain, that's a really vulnerable time for children and adolescents, and we need to protect that brain development as much as we can. And so we want to, avoid exposure to cannabis and to other drugs. I often counsel parents on trying to set a good example for their kids by not having cannabis at home, not using it themselves. Kids may not feel comfortable talking to a parent or guardian about drugs, alcohol, and nicotine, and the things that are going on in their worlds. But if they have a pediatrician who is able to have open conversations with them and takes a sort of non-judgmental approach and is just willing to receive information, or a guidance counselor or a teacher, some adult that is willing to just be there and listen, I think that can be a really key intervention, right? Just having a positive adult role model in your life with whom you can talk these things over. And it's important for all of us who play these roles in kids' lives to be aware, actually, of the dangers of cannabis. That even though it's legal for adults, it is not legal for kids, and there really are dangers. We need to be aware of it. We can offer that education to the kids with whom we are interfacing. And then I think also when kids start to have challenges, either with the substance use directly, maybe they're using every day, a couple times a day, starting to have a really hard time at school or at home, or if they're having challenges with other mental illnesses, right? Signs of depression, anxiety, maybe early signs of psychosis. Those are all times that we should be seeking help rapidly. We don't want to wait for things to reach to a crisis point in order to get child help and support.